Credo Voices, the podcast where we bring you inspiring stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. I'm your host, Awele Okibo, the CEO of Credo Advisory. In a world where the wealthiest 10% hold nearly 75% of global wealth, inequality is not just a matter of numbers. It's a reflection of deep-rooted disparities that affect race, gender, and marginalized communities worldwide. This was highlighted in the 2023 World Inequality Report. In this episode of Credo Voices, we head to Germany to meet Emilia Roig, the visionary founder of the Center for Intersectional Justice. Emilia challenges entrenched systems of oppression and inequality, pushing for a future where justice, equality, and peace are realities for everyone. Her work champions Sustainable Development Goal 5, gender equality, Goal 10, reduced inequalities, and Goal 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions. Join us for an inspiring conversation on how Emilia's groundbreaking advocacy is reshaping systems and fostering a more inclusive, equitable world. Today, I have Dr. Emilia with us. Emilia, welcome. It's so great to have you on Credo Voices.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
Okay, so Emilia, you are a renowned activist. Your voice is quite profound in the areas of social justice. Can you tell me, how did you start on this journey? Did you always wanted to be this voice?
No, not at all. I've always been very moved by injustice. I've been very moved by injustice in the sense that I spotted it from a very young age, and I just didn't accept that it was a fact of life. I didn't accept that injustice was a normal part of human experience. And I think, of course, like you can have injustice happening, for example, when a flood is happening somewhere, let's say there wouldn't be global warming, which of course is there is global warming, but imagine, and then there would be a flood somewhere, then people would be affected by the flood, and it would be a form of injustice in a sense that isn't created and manufactured by humans. And so the type of injustice that I'm going against, or at least that I refuse to accept as a normal fact of human existence, is the injustice that is crafted and manufactured by humans, by systems of oppression.
I couldn't agree more. So to the point where you actually wrote about it. So you have two books that you've published. Can we talk about the first one? So in 2020, you published a book titled Why We Matter. It's critically acclaimed. Can you share with me what's the core premise of the book and what's the message you want your readers to take away?
Thank you. So Why We Matter, The End of Oppression. So it's written in German. I haven't yet found a publisher in English. So for now, it's just in German and other languages as well. The premise of the book is to understand that oppression is part of our everyday lives, that oppression is the fabric of our society. And so based on everyday stories, so it's a nonfiction book, but I'm trying to really make oppression palatable to everyone, trying to understand how oppression plays out on the street, at home, at the hospital, at work, at school, in the media, in politics. So each chapter is dedicated to a particular sphere of society and explaining how in this particular sphere oppression is playing out and oppression is materialized. And I'm having an intersectional approach to it, meaning that I'm not only looking at patriarchal oppression or capitalist oppression or racist oppression and colonial oppression, but I'm really looking at how each and every of these types of oppression are entwined in each other and reinforce and mutually reinforce each other.
Thank you. Now, I happen to know that this stemmed from a deep personal family experience. Am I correct?
Yes.
Can you share that? Because oftentimes, as you mentioned, you pointing out the systemic elements of discrimination and oppression, I think over time we actually get numb. We're not even aware we're in an oppressive system. So your book does a good job in highlighting and kind of bringing to the fore times and occasions where there is that oppression. But take us back to your personal experience, please.
So personal experience is absolutely central and crucial in understanding oppression, but not only. And when we try to focus on personal experience, then it tends to overlook the systemic and the historical aspects of oppression. And at the same time, it was very important for me in both of my books to really speak to my personal lived experience in order to show that I can analyze a societal issue, a long-standing phenomenon of systemic oppression, and also link it to my personal experience. Because very often there's a dichotomy, a false dichotomy that is made between those who experience and those who know. Those who experience have an experience which is subjective, and those who know can observe and have a non-partial observation and opinion. And in that sense, it means that if you speak to your personal experience, if you try to locate yourself in what is happening in society, it will tend to delegitimize your expertise. And I try to break that myth and to break the false dichotomy that says that you cannot be an expert and a person affected at the same time. I'm trying to show that experience, lived experience, is another form of expertise that tends to be erased and that tends to be delegitimized.
Emilia, thank you. So both of them they're not mutually exclusive. The lived experience of oppression, you're saying, is just as important as the expertise. So, for instance, if you're having some kind of a forum where that addresses oppression, what you're saying is you don't having a panel of only experts in the field does not do justice. You must have those people, those voices who have actually lived it. Am I correct?
I'm saying that it's equally important and that, it depends on what topic it is. Like if you're doing a panel on COVID-19, you don't necessarily need to have a person who has COVID-19 on the panel, right? And I feel, but that if we're talking about systemic oppression, like if you're having a panel on the patriarchy and on patriarchal oppression and on women's rights, and you don't have any women on the panel, yes, then it's a big problem. Right. And it's the same with racism. If only white people are speaking about racism without any person affected by systemic racism, then in fact, it's an issue.
Okay, I understand. So you started talking about your family's personal experience in line with what you're talking about. Would you mind sharing that, please?
My personal experience, yes, sure. I grew up in a family that I can now describe as highly colonial and very racist. My father is Jewish Algerian with a Spanish father, and my mother is from Martinique. It means that my father grew up in a very colonial context in Algeria, and then they moved to the Ivory Coast and Central Africa in the 70s. During that time, he internalized so much of colonial patterns and colonial thinking. My grandfather was a militant, a right-wing populist militant. I would even describe it as Nazi. I grew up in that political climate. And when I say political climate, because it was constantly there, it was never described objectively as racist. It means that there was always the phrase, oh, your granddad, yeah, sometimes he's saying bad things, but he's not racist. And he loves you, so he can be racist. And at the same time, I could definitely make sense of it as a child and understand that, yes, this is still racism. So I had an intuition that all of this was not right. And at the same time, I was constantly gaslit by my environment and my family into believing that it was not. The relationship of my mother and my father was a highly abusive relationship on the grounds that my mother is a woman and a Black woman at the same time. So I could see all of that as a child, but I couldn't articulate it. I saw that there was an injustice, but I couldn't make sense of the fact that my mother's identity as a woman and as a Black woman was the basis of this unequal and unjust treatment. I couldn't make sense of the fact that my grandparents' lives in colonial Algeria and later in colonial Ivory Coast and Bangui was the basis of their racist and colonial ideas. My grandfather was spreading so much anti-Semitism as well without it being named as such. So I grew up in a very anti-Semitic and racist climate. And this is what I think prepared me to, because I had a real person in front of me who experienced this racism. And also, my mother told me about her upbringing in a very small French city, a family of seven black children and two black parents, and how much racism she encountered. And it didn't leave me indifferent, because I could see it as well in my own life, and I could see that black people face discrimination and injustice. And so this is what prepared me for the work I do. And yeah, I wanted to know more. I wanted to understand it.
Your upbringing and your family is quite unique in the sense where someone like me who comes from a very homogeneous cultural experience, your experience clearly demonstrates the conflict. You know, you have a grandfather who loves you, who's anti-Semitic. You have a black mother who experienced racism. So as a child of this very, very complex environment, what advice would you give your 7-year-old self? How do you guide or teach or raise awareness to children like you were in these similar experiences? Because I can't imagine how difficult it must have been having someone that you love. And at that age, you're clearly able to identify that, okay, this doesn't seem right. This doesn't seem fair. How would you do that? If you could talk to some 7-year-old girls or 7-year-old boys in similar circumstances, what would you tell them?
I would tell them to trust themselves. I think we're all born with a pure sense of justice. And justice is nothing else but love, right? Because justice could also be seen, of course, it's a construct. It's something that humans constructed. But I think all of us, and sometimes I love animals and I love observing animals, and animals have that sense too. They feel when injustice is taking place and they don't like it, they react to it. And so I think the energy that we're clearly speaking to is love. And so when children in that age have a feeling that something's not right, they should believe themselves, they should trust themselves. And the thing is that our entire society is geared towards delegitimizing our own feelings, our gut feelings, and crafting our thoughts, crafting the way we see the world so that we can accept the status quo better, right? So in order to accept the status quo, there are stories that are told to us. Like a story that is told is that, the powerful deserve to be powerful because they're smarter, they're more hardworking, they're the better people. And those who do not have power, those who are poor, those who considered failures by our society deserve it because they're not as smart, they're not as hardworking, they don't make the right decisions, etc. So these are stories and narratives that we are being taught in order to accept injustice. And what I want to say is that none of us is made for these stories firsthand. I think all of us as children, as little children and pure souls, we don't buy it, so to say, but we are taught to learn that in the course of our lives.
And as we grow, it seems as if that instinct, that inner, that spirit ends up being dulled. And after a while, we end up silencing it and in conforming with, society's expectations. From founding the Center for Intersectional Justice to publishing her disruptive book, Why We Matter, Emilia Roig has become a leading voice in the fight against systemic oppression. She discusses confronting societal denial and the critical role of personal reflection in collective change. Emilia emphasizes that real progress requires not just understanding, but also acknowledging discrimination while pushing for inclusivity in every conversation about human rights. We go through moments of social awareness and social consciousness when something happens, when there's an instance of police brutality that is in the media, when there's an instance, for instance, the Me Too movement. There have been kind of like flare-up. Something happens, the media carries it, people share their opinions, and for some time it seems that there's actually a change happening. People are listening, people are doing things, organizations are now kind of evaluating the way they operate. But then, Emilia, there then seems to be, after some time, a despondency. So there's this quote unquote woke movement. That's, in other words, just the being socially aware. But right now, there seems to be a fatigue around this. There seems to be almost even a backlash against people who are continuously trying to ensure that those marginalized voices are heard, that these systems of oppression are deconstructed. The work you're doing, how do you mitigate that? How do you solve that?
So it's not a fatigue. I wouldn't say it's a fatigue. I would say it's really it's really a backlash, and it's denial and it's gaslighting what's taking place. It's not merely that people are tired of it, right? So I think there's an active act of erasure that is taking place. And what we can do is just continue, you know, and not let ourselves be intimidated or not let ourselves be discouraged, because the mere fact that people are going against this collective awakening is a sign of the resistance that is taking place. So it's not to be taken personally, but I think, change is scary. A shift and such a profound paradigmatic shift that would be the end of oppression is extremely scary. It's not something that people take in and say, okay, fine, we're going to organize the world completely differently. And, nothing is going to look like we know it. Of course, it's going to lead to a backlash. So I think what's important is not to spend too much energy trying to convince that we're good people, trying to convince that we have the right angle, that we have the right perspective, because this is sterile. I think spending too much energy on this, and it's Toni Morrison who said this, I think, she said that racism is about making us spend so much time, wasting our energy and time in convincing over and over again. And this is energy that is stolen from us, because with this kind of energy, we could continue to imagine a better world and work towards it.
Has there been an instance that you faced outright discrimination, and how did you handle it?
I think the way I handle it, so I cannot name one particular case. I have them in my book. I have several of them, so that's why I don't want to give one more weight than the others. What I can say is that in such cases, there's first denial, also on my part, to not see what's happening, right? Because this is what we've learned. So when you have a discrimination taking place, the first reaction is to not see it, is to not label it as discrimination, to not have the discernment to see what's really going on. And then after that, you have a moment of lucidity where you can perceive that discrimination is taking place. Once this is the case, you can take measures to have your voice heard and it being recognized. But it's not always the case that it works. So in some cases, I would try to fight for my cause. But in many cases, what I had to do was to accept and to continue for a bigger fight, or like something bigger than just myself. Yeah.
You mentioned, there's so many different areas of discrimination and human rights abuses or oppression. Is there one you pay a particular focus to? And if so, why?
I wouldn't say there's one that I play. No, all of them. I think all forms of oppression, there's no hierarchy, I think, in my frame of thought. I think there's a level of gravity, like, for example, what's happening currently in Gaza, for example, has a high level of gravity, just like what is happening in Sudan is having a very high level of gravity and is nevertheless not taken seriously, or even taken as a non-existent issue, even though hundreds of thousands of people have already died. And so in that sense, I think it's important for me to say that there shouldn't be a hierarchy. And currently there is a hierarchy of issues. There is a hierarchy of geography. There is a hierarchy of identity. So this is what we need to fight against.
So when you partner with organizations, how do you get them to understand this, to focus? Because there'll be some organizations that are focused more on racial discrimination, some maybe more around gender. So can you just tell me, how do you navigate the different organizations, or how you get support around these issues?
Yeah. So I think it's okay that not all organizations are focusing on all forms of discrimination. So it's completely fine that some organizations are specifically working on women's rights or on disability rights or on LGBTQI rights. So this is not a problem. The only thing is that within these organizations, there needs to be an intersectional lens to it. So if you're going to work on the rights of women, then you have to be sure that you're not focusing on one type of women, that you're not focusing on the most privileged type of women. And that's the same with each and every other identity-based groups. And I think, in that sense, that's what we always keep in mind, or that's what I always keep in mind, I would say, because I'm speaking in my own name.
Yes. And so what are some of the obstacles you face? Is it getting people to understand? Is it getting people to act? Is it getting funding? Tell me, what are the obstacles that you face in your work, trying to raise this awareness and elevate people's consciousness to these important issues?
The most difficult is definitely that there's a lot of awareness work that needs to be done. So also a lot of denial, a lot of people who refuse to look at the situation in a way that can help us truly grasp the extent of the matter, the extent of the issue, the extent of the violence that is the result of the hierarchies that were placed in the world. And so the main obstacle will be denial, I would say. The fact that over and over again, we constantly have to come back to that question: does it really exist? Is racism really a problem? Is sexism really a problem? Constantly.
Yeah, and Emilia, it's not just on the part. Even we even there's that we experience that sense of denial. Like, was that really fair, or
Mm-hmm.
was
Yeah.
that person just racist to me, or was that email or that comment, are they exhibiting, unconscious bias? So even that denial and also doubt is really strong. And
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done in just educating people, especially those in
Yeah.
marginalized voices, to really be able to recognize it. Because if you're not aware of it and it goes over your head, then we can't even begin to start identifying the issues to solve.
Absolutely.
So very quickly, how can we help you, Emilia? Tell us, how can we support you if someone was able to solve all your problems? Where do you need the most help with your work?
I would say that people engage in self work, that people engage in looking at themselves in a very honest way and try to unlearn all the narratives that are so harmful for
Okay,
humanity. I think this is how we can all help each other. So it's not just me, but it's just really like, how can we live in a world where humanity goes first? Like
excellent.
where love is being cultivated on a daily basis.
Thank you so much, Emilia. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Emilia Roig's work stands as a reminder that true progress in social justice lies in understanding the intersectionality of inequality. By exploring how race, gender, class, and other factors overlap, she challenges us to rethink how we confront injustice. Her activism doesn't just address oppression in isolation, but pushes for deeper and more inclusive conversations. By advancing discourse on intersectionality, Emilia's efforts provide tools for building more inclusive and equitable societies, making her work a driving force behind movements for change. As we reflect on Emilia's contributions to advancing the Sustainable Development Goals, let's remember the power of understanding the intersectional nature of our struggles. Together, we can build a world where every individual, no matter their background, can thrive. Let's continue to raise our voices for equity and justice. Thank you for listening. Until next time, stay curious and keep believing in the power of your voice. This is Awele Okibo, signing off for Credo Voices.